Welcome to Docs Outside the Box podcast. This is your official show, looking inside the minds of cutting-edge and innovative doctors. Think you'll find these stories in any medical textbook? Sorry. You're getting real live insight from men and women pushing the envelope beyond medicine. Ordinary doctors doing extraordinary things. Let's start now with your host, Dr. Nee Darko.
This episode is brought to you by Set for Life Insurance. Protect yourself against life setbacks with Set for Life Insurance. Set for Life Insurance gets you disability and life insurance at a reduced cost with their exclusive discounts. Now that's why I use them. Visit www.setforlifeinsurance.com and tell them Dr. Darko sent you. What's good, everyone? This is Dr. Nee Darko here with another episode of Docs Outside the Box. Yeah. Coming off a really exciting February. Listen, we hit our highest downloads ever, and I just want to say thank you all for continuing to either download, share, or just, in general, write back to me and let me know how these podcasts have affected you. And today's episode is a good one. I always say that for all my episodes. This one is really a good one. This is about paying off your student loans. If you've ever had to discover or try to figure out how do I pay off my student loans quickly and most efficiently, this is the one for you. This is the podcast that you want to listen to. I wish I had discovered my next guest years ago because, one, I would have paid off a lot less in my student loans. Now, if you go back to our previous episode, or not this previous episode, but the one where we talked about paying off $662,000 of student loan debt, you would have learned that me and my wife, through various times in residency, had forbeared, had deferred, and what started off initially as $240,000 of student loan debt ballooned to $330,000 each. Ouch. Yeah, I know. So if we had known about this guy a lot sooner, we would have definitely done things a lot differently. Now, we paid off our loans faster, but I think we would have started off as attendings paying off our loans as opposed to waiting a year and a half to pay off these loans. But look, let's get to the point. My next guest is Dr. Cory Fawcett, and he runs the website Prescription for Financial Success, helping healthcare professionals grow. Now, let's take a little bit of a step back with Dr. Cory Fawcett. He is a general surgeon by training, and he was looking to scale back his general surgery workload. This started to have him think outside the box. After many years of teaching Crown Financial Ministries, which was then run by Larry Burkett, he decided that he wanted to take his idea of helping doctors with their personal finance and debt issues and start his own company, start his own, in essence, quote unquote, ministry. He now has published 3 books in the Doctor's Guide Financial Series. Today, we're going to be talking about eliminating debt. He also writes a weekly blog, and he posts about 3 to 5 minute videos every day about financial planning, about finances for physicians on his Facebook page daily. So after his first book won an award in nonfiction, he decided to get really serious about this, and he decided to give up clinical medicine and concentrate on changing the financial lives of doctors through writing as well as through coaching. Over the last 3 years, he's been working in a critical access hospital in the Pacific Northwest. And congratulations to him. His last day of clinical medicine was on February 20th, 2017. And he now calls himself a repurposed surgeon. So on today's show, we're going to be talking about his book, Eliminating Debt, which I found to be extremely helpful, to the point where the white coat investor even called him the quote unquote Dave Ramsey for doctors without the bad investing advice, end quote. And I also agree with that also. His advice, his techniques, even the explanation in his book, it's very simple. It's applicable, whether you're a resident, whether you're a young attending, even if you're a medical student. So I wish I had definitely discovered him a lot sooner, as you can understand. I keep stressing that point. But on this show, here are the things that you're going to learn about Dr. Fawcett and some of the highlights that we're going to talk about on this podcast. So we're going to talk about the age-old debate about paying off debt versus investing. We're also going to talk about why he thinks you should pay off your debt as quick as possible. And then I present to him a scenario of a young woman, a young female neurosurgeon attending with plenty of debt, plenty of money as an attending, but no savings and no knowledge of investing. And he's going to, in essence, give advice as to how she should start her process of paying off debt, as well as starting the process of saving and developing a proper investment portfolio. He also gives some advice to pre-meds as well as medical students. And as always, with all the physicians on the show, we're going to learn hashtag why he's not just a doc, or hashtag I'm not just a doc, how he answers that one. So without further ado, I present Dr. Cory Fawcett. Dr. Cory Fawcett, welcome to Docs Outside the Box.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, I've been looking forward to having you on the show for a while, most notably for your series of books. But the one that we're going to be talking about today is The Doctor's Guide to Eliminating Debt. But before we get into all of that, let's learn a little bit more about you. Tell us where you're from, what medical school you went to, residency, things like that.
Well, I grew up in southern Oregon in a small town called Medford. A town where I graduated from the same high school as my grandmother. So I have lots of roots here in Southern Oregon. I always wanted to be a doctor. I guess I started off wanting to be a dentist because I saw as a little kid The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, and he had just terrible teeth, and I thought that's what made him really mean. So I wanted to be a dentist so I could fix the Grinch's teeth. And that's kind of where it all got started. Later on, it kind of evolved into being a doctor, and I went off to medical school at Oregon Health Sciences University. I did my residency at Kern Medical Center in Bakersfield, California. It's almost like a rural residency where, as a general surgeon, I learned to do everything. So I was able to do vascular surgery and thoracic surgery and a practice in a small town. I settled in Grants Pass, Oregon, only a half hour away from where my parents live. Met a wife from Oregon also, who also had deep roots, came to Oregon in the 1800s. Not her, but her family.
Her family.
Yeah. And we settled in here, and I practiced medicine in a multiple general surgeon group. And we had at the peak 6 of us. And I spent 20 years with that practice, at which time I was kind of ready to scale back and not work so hard. General surgery is a pretty tough gig.
I could definitely co-sign on that one.
After 20 years of it, I was ready to slow down a bit, but the practice that I had didn't really allow for part-time. It was kind of full-time or you're not here. And it was basically because we shared expenses evenly. So if I worked less, my expenses didn't go down, but my income did. And there comes a point where you're actually not bringing in as much as you have expenses for. So working part-time didn't work, so I was experimenting with other ways that I could work. And I spent 3 more years working at critical access hospitals nearby, helping like lone doctors, the only doctor in a small town, only general surgeon, and he needs some time off. And they weren't happy with just random locums, people coming in, giving him time off. And I could come in regularly for them, give him some time off. And it kind of, I got a paid vacation, basically, because I'm just covering the ER in a small little hospital. I might only work a couple hours a day. I actually averaged, I figured it out, I averaged 0.9 new patients a day when I was working in these places. So I found a way to extend my practice a little bit longer and not just quit after the 20 years and still do some good in small towns, help out with the doctor shortage. It was a lot of fun. And during that time, I realized that my practice was kind of coming to an end and I wanted something productive to do. I had a great interest in personal finance and had been teaching personal finance to doctors and other people through my church for many years. I taught Crown Financial Ministries course, which is a 10-week class, and I've been talking over many patients and at the scrub sink for many years. I decided to turn that avocation into a vocation and began teaching doctors this and started a book series. And after getting that up and running, I won an award for my first book. I got a nonfiction book of the year for the Doctor's Guide to Starting Your Practice Right. And that the night of that award ceremony in Idaho, I kind of looked at my wife and I said, you know what? I think this is a sign. I think it's time for us to move on. And I put in my 90-day notice and gave up clinical medicine. And that happened last February. It's been 11 months now.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. And I moved on to a new routine and called myself now a repurposed surgeon. Not really retired because I'm still doing things, but repurposed. I have a new mission, and that's to teach doctors personal finance and help them get their financial life together. And I've been having a good time traveling around, speaking, coaching, writing, and I have a whole new life now.
So you are definitely a doc outside the box, and I'm glad you brought up your series, The Doctor's Guide to. You have so many different books, one about alternative careers and one that you just mentioned before. The one that we're going to be talking about today, which I really enjoyed reading, is Eliminating Debt. And I'm not sure if you know, but recently me and my wife recently paid off about $600,000 in student loan debt in about 3 years. So this book, I wish I had known about this book before we started the process, because I think we would have been able to do things a lot more efficiently. But this is a really great read, and I definitely recommend this to all the listeners. So I'm glad we're here to talk about this. So talk to us.
Congratulations, by the way, on paying off all that debt. That's a great step.
That was a huge monkey off our back. So thank you very much. And so I want to ask you about when you first started writing these books. Tell us about what it was like starting to write a book, trying to formulate in your mind, do I have the knowledge to teach other doctors about this information? Were there any hurdles when you first started, formulating this book?
Well, it's an interesting story because the actual first book I wrote doesn't exist today. I got started, I went to a thing called SEEK. It's a conference to teach doctors about alternative careers, but I was thinking about doing something else. And I decided I wanted to get into this finance stuff, and I was really big on eliminating debt. I became personally debt-free in 2001 when I made my final house payment. And I've been teaching doctors to become debt-free, so I wanted to write that book, how to become debt-free. And so I just sat down with no prior knowledge and wrote a book. And then I met a publisher. She read the book. She says, hey, this is a good idea. This is a cruddy book, but this is a good idea. Let us help you, but we should expand this. And she thought, instead of just writing one book on how to get out of debt, why don't we start a series? And this will be a piece of it. And so she taught me a new technique to write books. And we started with the book, Starting Your Practice Right. And I sat down with her technique to write a book. And 30 days later, the book was finished.
Now, I know you can't share all of her secrets, but can you give us just one small little tip on how you were able to, accelerate your writing?
Well, I think there's two things to think about it. Number one is you would sit down and let's say you're going to talk about one topic, deciding to get out of debt. You're going to make this decision, okay? So for 3 minutes, you pick an amount of time, a short amount of time, you just brainstorm and write everything you know about getting out of debt, okay? Just dump all the information of making the decision to get out of debt, that one little piece. And then your alarm goes off and you move to a new one. And just for a few minutes, dump all the information you have about that one little question, that one little topic. And then go back and write the chapter based on all that stuff you just dumped out of your head. So it gives you a chance to get all the pieces on the page you'd like to say without trying to get it right the first time. Just dump that information onto the page quickly and then go back and say, okay, now how would I tell that information to somebody in a way that makes sense? So you can get all the little pieces, because you know that stuff. It's in your mind. You know what you need to tell them, but you haven't organized it yet. So dump it all out onto the page and then get started.
Now, and I appreciate it. That's a really, really good tip, because there's a lot of listeners on this show. They're really interested in writing a book, but they don't know how to start. So definitely appreciate that, because I think a lot of them get caught on, let's just say, writer's block. They don't know what to write, when to start, how long the book should be. And I think that's a really great start, just to kind of brainstorm and then from there start a chapter and so forth. So thank you. Now, in this book, I don't want to give away too many of the details and too many of the secrets, because this is really an awesome book. But I just want to kind of take it chapter by chapter and talk to you about that. My first, or at least my favorite chapter, is My Debt-Free Journey, which is your first chapter. And some of the things that you talk about, like thinking debt was a part of normal life, is really fascinating, because I thought I was the only person who felt this way. And then you also talk about malignant credit carcinoma. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, what I wanted to do with this book was take the message to high income people. When I would teach the Crown classes, I would run into this problem. The nurses would say, "Oh, well, you doctors, you could pay off all your debt because you have a high income." And the doctors would say, "Oh, well, the nurses, they could pay off their debt because they don't have as much debt as me." And so each person would look at one piece and say, "This is why I can't do it. My debt's too high, my income's too low," or whatever it is. And so doctors weren't getting the message that you can pay off debt. Debt is not a natural part of life. You don't have to be in debt forever. And so I tried to say, how would a doctor think about this differently than everyone else? And so I decided, well, what if, we're trained to think about diseases, right? So what if I talked to a doctor as if debt was a disease? It'd need a name, like malignant credit carcinoma. And then you could just think about, it has a prevalence, right? It didn't used to be a problem until around the 1920s. And then sometime in the 40s, they started having credit cards. And then today, the prevalence has just gone way up. There's symptoms, irritability, sleeplessness, stress, burnout. You get signs of malignant credit carcinoma, like unpaid credit card balances, arguments about finance, robbing Peter to pay Paul. There's etiology, genetics. I think you get it from your parents. It's infectious, and it's really badly airborne in the driveway when you're looking at your friend's new car or boat. I discovered it is an airborne infectious disease because you just stand next to somebody with something new and you want it.
So what are you going to say? Like the differential is like keeping up with the Joneses or something?
Yeah, well, there's all kinds of stuff. Tumor characteristics, treatment, complications, the prognosis. We already know the treatment. There's a great treatment for it. The chemotherapy is money. Just put money at it and it goes away. But you know what? If we never even realize we could pay off our debts, we won't. Somewhere along the line, you got to realize that, hey, having all this debt's maybe not a good thing for me, and I could get rid of it. I do not have to have this forever. I had a nurse who once told me she leased a new car for her college student. I said, "Are you kidding me?" At the time, it was an $18,000 car. And I said, your college student doesn't even have a job. I have a really good job, and I don't own an $18,000 car. Is there something wrong here? And she says, well, I really wanted a reliable car.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Absolutely. The thought process.
Reliable?
Yeah, the thought process of the only way that you can get a reliable car is if you get a new one or if you lease it.
And it's got to be an expensive one because those cheap ones aren't reliable. And it's like, and I said, well, why didn't you just pay cash? Because you could have bought her a car for the amount of money you had for the down payment of the lease and been done with it. And she says, well, that's just not the way you do it. Everybody has a car loan. And that was the attitude. Everybody has a car. The only way you can get a new car is to borrow money.
If you look at the commercials, every commercial has an APR attached to a price tag, some type of monthly payment. There's credit card commercials all over. It's the norm right now. What do you think is?
No car ad tells you the price of the car.
Absolutely.
They tell you the monthly payment.
Or if they're telling you the price of the car, it's in that small little blurb that you can't read about or even hear because they're talking about it so fast, but I do agree with you. What do you think, what's the best way for more doctors to really find out the power of their income, the power of being able to pay back debt? Because right now it's the little secret, right? The majority of people or the majority of physicians think that, you treat your loans the same way how you got into medical school. It's this long drawn out process, delayed gratification, and hoping in your 80s or in your 70s that you'll be done with debt.
Well, there's a chart in the book following a house mortgage. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
And it equates to what you're going to have to do to pay off that house. And if I just walked through that, I just opened it up to that page, let's say you get a 30-year mortgage on a $600,000 mortgage. And that's about the average doctor mortgage nowadays, by the way, around $600,000. So you're going to pay around $600,000 in interest, and your total cost is going to be $1.2 million. Okay? But how did you get that $1.2 million? Okay? So you had to earn some money. So you had to earn $2 million so you could pay $800,000 in income taxes to have the $1.2 million to pay off your $600,000 loan. But if you, let's say, like me in private practice, I had overhead to cover, which would cover about 50% of what I got. And I had collections that didn't completely come in. And when you bill something, you don't actually get to collect what you bill. So it came out to this. I have to bill $8 million to collect $4 million to pay my $2 million overhead to gross $2 million to get the $800,000 taxes paid to leave me with the $1.2 million to pay off my $600,000 house. So I'm going to have to do $8 million worth of billings to pay off that house in 30 years.
That's crazy.
But if I did the same thing in 7 years, I only need $4.8 million in billings. It's almost half the billing, half the work. And when you equate that to how much work you do, you divide how much you're going to have to do to pay off this loan in 30 years versus 7, that extra 23 years of interest. That equated for me, when I figured out my average patient cost, I'd have to see 17,000 patients if I wanted to stretch that mortgage out over an extra 23 years.
Oof. Wow.
17,000 more patients is what it costs me to pay all that interest. Now, if you don't pay all that interest, you pay your house off in 7 years instead of 30, and you save all that interest, and you don't have to see those 17,000 patients, what could you do with that extra time? You could take a day off a week for 10 years if you didn't have to see those 17,000 patients, because you have to produce that much money just to cover that debt. If you pay it off, you stop having to produce any money to cover that debt. And when you get caught up in this stretching it out, and the thing is that was the difference between paying it off in 7 years or 30 years. But 30 years isn't what doctors pay their house off in. That would be if you got a 30-year loan and then you paid it off on time. What happens is every 5 years we refinance it for another 30. And then 5 years later, refinance it for another 30. And by the time we reach retirement age, we still have a 30-year mortgage left to pay. So it's way worse than the 17,000 patients I described, because we tend to think this is the way of life. You have to have mortgages, and it's going to go on for the whole rest of my life. And we just plan that way, and we give up a fortune to the bank.
Now, since you opened up the can of worms with talking about a scenario, I created a scenario, and it's about the concept that you talk about in the book of should I pay off debt versus pay off loans, should I invest, which I think is a really compelling argument that I think nobody can win. I think you just kind of have to just take action after running the numbers. So are you down with a scenario if I throw one at you?
Sure.
Okay, so let's take a scenario of Michelle is a 36-year-old neurosurgeon. She's fresh out of fellowship. She found the job of her dreams. She's going to be making over $500,000 a year. I think neurosurgeons probably make more, but just for scenario's sake, work with me. She has $250,000 in student loan debt, and I'm going to give you some numbers to work with. The federal portion of her loans, which is the majority, is 4%. And then she has private loans that range between 6 and 12%. Okay. She has about $30,000 in credit card debt. We know how high the APR is on that one. And in terms of savings, she only has $10,000. She's never invested a dime. And as a matter of fact, she's scared of the stock market. Currently, she's renting. But just like every person who goes on an interview, whenever they take you on an interview, they show you the really nice homes. So she's eyeing a very expensive house on the other side of town. Okay. And then also she likes Tesla, but hasn't bought yet. So I want to know, Dr. Fawcett, what say you?
So is she single?
She's single.
Okay, so she's got it made. Okay, she's got it made.
She's got all this debt, though.
Yeah. But here's a single person who is used to living on $50,000 a year. Okay, that's what her lifestyle has been for several years. She lives on $50,000 a year, right? And she has no other obligations. It's just her. Now, she makes $500,000 a year from her job. Let's say she takes home $350,000 of that, okay? In her situation, she could double her lifestyle this first year, double her lifestyle. She could live on $100,000 instead of $50,000, and she could pay off all of her student loans this year. And then she's debt-free, and now next year she's going to make $500,000. And the sky's the limit. I mean, she can save a huge amount of money in just a few months on that kind of income for a down payment on a pretty nice house and begin paying that house off.
But what about when people start throwing in, well, maybe you should have invested? What if you delay paying off the debt so that you can pay off or so that you can invest more? Like, what's your thoughts on that argument?
In her case, what you're describing to me is somebody who has so much money, it doesn't really matter what she does, as long as she doesn't do stupid stuff. As long as she doesn't, start leasing Teslas and buying stupid houses, and as long as she doesn't do stupid stuff, she's in a position where if she plays her cards right and advances her lifestyle a little slow in the beginning, she's going to have so much money. So you imagine the first year you're totally debt-free. Now year number 2, you could start putting away easily. Now bump her lifestyle up to $150,000 a year, and now she could be putting away $200,000 a year in her investments and savings. Now she doesn't like the stock market, so she's going to need to be investing in things that she feels very comfortable with. She's probably going to be buying bonds, certificates of deposit, maybe property, but she's kind of leery of the stock market. I think maybe she needs to do some education to feel better about the stock market so she doesn't feel scared of the stock market. There's no real reason to be scared of it. You just have to remember that it's a long-term thing. So when the market goes down, it doesn't matter. When the market went down, I wasn't even looking at my stocks because it didn't matter. I wasn't going to be selling anything, so the current price is irrelevant. But we get caught up in that. So, teaching her, spend some time to teach her about the stock market. But, the thing is the difference between the investment and the debt, if you're going to pay your debt off quickly, that difference is extremely small because you're talking about a very short period of time and a very small difference in investment. Now, if you're going to be somebody who says, oh, but I'm just going to leave this debt forever, and I'm only going to make the 3 or 4% above, so I'm going to earn 8% and pay 4%, so I'm going to earn 4% a year forever by keeping this debt, I say, hey, get rid of this debt this year, and then next year earn 8% a year forever. You don't have to earn only 4%, the difference between the two. You could be earning the whole 8%. Because right now, your plan would be, if you want to invest instead of pay debt, your plan would be to give half of your profits to the bank. You could keep all of the profits, but you're going to give up half of them because you're going to stay leveraged. And the
go ahead, please.
The other problem with leverage is there comes a time where the leverage could get called on you. I've been in that situation.
I think Dave Ramsey talks about that situation also. That's how he ended up getting into so much debt when he first started, right?
I'm not sure about his early story, but there's a lot of people with that story that they had the money. There's one story that just eats me up. That this guy who was in the construction business, he had $200,000 worth of debt, and he had $200,000 in the bank, and so he considered himself virtually debt-free. I've heard that so many times. But I'm virtually debt-free. I have enough money in the bank to pay off my house if I wanted to. Well, why don't you pay off the house and be actually debt-free instead of virtually debt-free? But so he has his $200,000 in the bank, and he has a $200,000 loan that he uses kind of as revolving credit to run his construction business. So he thought he was fine. But it turns out that the bank went bankrupt. And so he thought he was okay, bank goes bankrupt. I got 200,000 and I owe 200,000. I should be fine. But the thing is the bank sells their assets and liabilities to different places. So the FDIC guarantees his $200,000 that's in the bank, and they'll pay it to him someday. Not right now, but later. And the $200,000 loan was sold to somebody else, and they called the loan and said, we need you to pay this loan off. So his cash got tied up, and he'll get it someday, and his loan is due right now, and he went under. Having this, quote, virtual debt-free. The thing is, virtual debt-free isn't actual debt-free, and actual debt-free can get you into trouble when the market goes down.
Man, that's really sobering, and I'm sure people who are listening to this show know someone who's kind of riding that on the edge, and I know a couple of people who do that, particularly in the real estate realm. And when a bank comes calling, you better have that money. And I want to.
If you live on the edge like that, you're risking things that you don't need to risk. A doctor with a high income and a lot of money going into savings doesn't have to be risking that money. You're going to turn out really good in the future if you just keep that up. There's no reason to risk it. And when you have the debt, when you're investing and holding the debt, so you're trying to catch that difference, that works really good in an up market. But when the market goes down, that scenario doesn't work out so good. And a lot of people get hurt really bad in the down market who are playing that interest game. I'm going to invest for more than I borrow for.
Now, my second favorite chapter is chapter 4, and that's where you talk about how to recognize bad advice. And I think you really clearly delineate the different conflict of interest that different players have, from accountants to bankers to financial advisors who are commission based. I find it very fascinating. So let's pick one topic, and I'd really like for you to expound on that. Let's talk about the banker and what his conflict of interest is, particularly if you have a mortgage with that bank.
Okay. So the thing is what we're talking about bad advice is when somebody tells you you shouldn't pay off your loan. So let's talk about the house loan. The banker's got your house loan, and the banker tells you, oh, it's a bad thing to pay off your loan. It's the last great tax advantage. You've got this great tax write-off with your interest on your loan. Well, the problem is, remember that the only way to get a tax write-off is to lose the money. So if you lose money, you can get a tax write-off. So you lose the interest, you pay it to the bank, you get a tax write-off. So the banker is telling you, you should keep paying me the interest so you can get that tax write-off. Because the banker makes money off of you paying him interest. That's how the bank makes money. Their only source of income really is interest. They charge some fees, but their big source is interest. So if he's making interest on your loan, he does not want you to pay off the loan. He does not have an incentive to tell you, hey, it would be in your best interest to pay off this loan. So no matter what your best interest is, his best interest is if you keep that loan and keep paying him interest. So he's not going to, if you go to the banker and say, should I pay off my loan or should I invest in the CD? Hey, he doesn't want you to pay off the loan, and he wants you to put the CD in his bank. So he's definitely biased. And so he's given you information based on what's good for him.
Definitely have had that moment, although I didn't have a mortgage, but in some other fashion with advisors, that's where this chapter definitely rang true. And it was really a sobering look at, how everybody is looking at your money and how you really, nobody else is going to care about your money as much as you do, you know, and I just really thought that was an excellent chapter. But let's take a moment to pivot. So we're getting towards the end of the interview, and I want to just ask you some fast fire questions where I ask you one thing, you tell me what comes off of the top of your brain, no filters, okay?
Okay.
All right, so what's one thing you want people, particularly doctors, to learn from this podcast?
You don't have to be in debt for the rest of your life. That's an option. You can pick a different option.
Haha, I love it. Mic drop. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you have given to yourself as a pre-med or even as a med student?
Knowing what I know now as a medical student. Be sure that you've been having a lot of people tell you that because of the high debt you're going to have, you need to pick a specialty that's high paying. Always pick
that's a good one.
Specialty.
That's a good one.
That's horrible advice, because you're going to be doing this for many, many hours a week for many years.
You better like it.
You better like it. And so if you pick a specialty only because it pays, like neurosurgery is a really, really hard life. It pays really good. Okay, neurosurgeons make a lot of money. So you say, I'm going to be a neurosurgeon because I want to make a lot of money and pay off all this debt and get way ahead. And then, that fifth night in a row coming in at 2 o'clock in the morning to do something, that money is going to mean very little to you. Mm-hmm. You got to be coming into work because you like what you're doing. And if you really like being a pediatrician, you're going to make enough money to be just fine. Don't be the neurosurgeon just because of the money. Be a neurosurgeon because you really love that kind of work. And so I would say to the medical student and the resident, find the thing you want to do because you love going to that rotation. I loved getting up and going to work at surgery today. Myself, I went to medical school. The first rotation I took was OBGYN. I absolutely hated that. The smell in the clinic drove me nuts. Then I was on pediatrics. Pediatrics, I got everything those kids brought into the thing. I was sick for the entire rotation, and the kids could never tell you what was wrong with them. And I hated that. Then I went to medicine at the VA, and those guys kept coming back in with the same thing. We treated you last month for that. Why didn't you do what you were supposed to? And after 9 months of those rotations, I absolutely hated those things. I didn't like these. I almost quit medical school because I said, this is not what I signed up for. The next rotation I took was general surgery, and I loved it. This is what I want to do. These guys are fixing stuff. And I fix somebody with appendicitis. They don't come back next month because they didn't do something they were supposed to do and still have appendicitis. I found something I loved, and therefore I loved my career. And so medical students and residents, do the thing that really floats your boat.
Love that answer.
Forget about the money. The money will be plenty.
Love it. Love it. What's one life hack or piece of technology that you use to make your life easier right now?
My to-do list.
Is it electronic or you write it down?
It's on my phone.
Okay. All right.
I found a to-do list to put on my phone, and I can categorize things into 3 categories. I got to do this today or somebody's going to die. It has to be done today. I need to do this sometime in the next week, and I need to do this sometime. And when I didn't get to something, because I used to keep them on my little note cards and stuff, and then every day I'm recopying the note cards and recopying the next day and recopying. I put it on my electronic on my phone. It's right there in my hand. I got to get these things done today. And then when you get those things done, you're done. You don't have to keep going. You can now stop and enjoy life because you finished today's tasks. If you overload your to-do list with all these things on it and they aren't really categorized, then you always feel like you have to keep going, keep going, keep going. You can never stop and take a break. So when I learned to categorize them better, it improved my my ability to get things done, because I could be sitting in the office and a patient didn't show up, and now I've got 20 minutes gap here, and I could look quickly on my to-do list and see, oh, one of the things I was supposed to do today was call this other guy about this thing. I could pick up the phone and make that call and get that thing done. because it was on the top of my list. These are the things for today. And you could work them in the little gaps. And it kind of changed my life to get my to-do list to be useful.
Love it. Love it. All right, Dr. Cory Fawcett. It's my last question, last sentence. I want you to complete this. I'm not just a doc, I'm a...
I'm not just a doc, I am the Dave Ramsey of docs.
That's what I'm talking about. Boom. Mic drop. Now that's a good one, and that's exactly how I describe your book. Actually, I think that, and I think also the White Coat Investor described your book that way. Also, the book is excellent. It's The Doctor's Guide to Eliminating Debt, and actually you have a whole series of books, but this one is an amazing book, and I do think of it almost like the Dave Ramsey of debt books for them. But this was a great time. I really appreciated you on the show. And why don't you let the audience know where they can find your books, where they can learn more about you?
They can find me at drcorysfawcett.com. That's my website. My business is called Prescription for Financial Success. You can use the same name, Dr. Cory S. Fawcett, to find me on Twitter, Facebook, and on LinkedIn. I have a video that comes out every day on Facebook, on my Facebook page, to teach you some little snippet. They're 5 minutes or less videos. They're just quickies. You know, in between patients, you got nothing to do. Somebody missed. Okay, I'm going to watch one of Dr. Fawcett's little videos. You can pick up the books on Amazon. You could get a hold of me through my website if you wanted to get an autographed copy of the book. I could get to do that. And if you run a medical school and you want bulk books to buy a new Starting Your Practice Right for every resident you have who's going to go out and start their practice. Now, it's not about private practice, it's starting the practice of medicine. Then they could get a hold of me for bulk prices. So I'm easy to find.
Excellent. Dr. Cory Fawcett, thank you for being on Docs Outside the Box. You truly are a doc outside the box.
Well, thank you for having me. It was fun.
Once again, I got to thank Dr. Cory Fawcett for being on the show. Definitely learned a lot from him, and I know you all did too. If you want to learn more about him as well as Prescription for Financial Success, make sure you check out his website, drcoryfawcett.com. His links will be in the show notes. You can also find all of his books, not only through his website, but also through Amazon.com. If you go to his website, you can find links to his YouTube channel, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages also. So I learned a lot. I know you learned a lot also. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe to this podcast so that you can always be up to date with new episodes. And listen, with this episode, I know you know someone else who's struggling in student loan debt, and they may not even be a doctor, but I definitely bet they can definitely benefit from this podcast. So go ahead and share this episode with them. So before I jet, just remember one thing. We only got one life. Let's make it count and live outside the box. Peace.